Welcome to the Home Building Hub, your essential podcast guide to building your new home. Hosted by industry experts Colin Bischoff and Darren Brennan, this conversational podcast will help better educate you about all things new home building so you can avoid costly mistakes and enjoy your building experience to the fullest, no matter which home builder you choose.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to the Home Building Hub. You're with Colin and co-host Darren Brennan as always. And today, Dazza, we're going to talk about a little thing called overshadowing. Now, to a lot of people who are in the process now, you've probably never heard of this. So something to keep in mind, something to learn from. And for those who have heard of it, it might be a little late, I suppose, yeah. Darren. But
sometimes that's the problem, and hence why we're talking about it.
Yeah, we thought we'd cover it. Topic that Darren's come up with here, again based off real life examples that he's got in his business, and we've had the same. Just making sure that we're putting it out there. If someone's heard of the term overshadowing, they can come to the podcast, type in overshadowing, and bang, here we go. This resource will be there for you to give you a bit of an understanding as to what it is. So, Dazza, how are we, mate? You good?
Yeah, going real well, mate. Really well, thank you. So I sort of put in our notes, one part I love about the podcast is the fact that we come across real life examples and they poke their head up and then that becomes the inspiration for, some of our next episodes. And it's often the case, we talk about this all the time of how do we keep coming up with content, people say to us, and it's because it's such a fluid industry and things change all the time and you come across something else all the time. We're always learning, and it's fantastic in that respect. So not only ourselves as, I like to perceive myself as an expert, and I know Colin likewise himself, but we're always learning. And that's, one of the powerful things about the podcast is it's an opportunity for us to share some of that knowledge with you guys, the listeners, and we really appreciate your time listening to it. So hopefully you take a little bit out of this one, and it's not always these overshadowing issues, like we said, sometimes poke their head up when you least expect it, and they're pretty ugly when they do. So we'll sort of run through what that looks like and how that goes. But yeah, it's not an uncommon thing. It's quite a common thing. It's just how is it best addressed and not blindside you.
Yeah. So I'll kick off with a bit of an explanation around it. So let's do that. So I guess what we're talking about specifically today is a term called overshadowing. And most people could probably work that out, what that means. But basically overshadowing of what's called private open space or recreational private open space. Okay, so that's basically, you're thinking of your backyard and it's getting sunlight, and then someone builds a monster double story next door to you and it blocks the entire backyard from getting any sunlight. That's actually not allowed. That double story being built, that would be restricted. That is called overshadowing. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. In terms of what the regulation actually says, which I'll read out, is the lesser of 75% or 40 meters squared with a minimum dimension of 3 of the neighbour's secluded private open space cannot have sunlight reduced for more than 5 hours between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. on the 22nd of September is the point that they sort of kick off with. So if the neighbour's secluded private open space is, or I suppose above, does not already receive sunlight, then it cannot be further reduced, right? So that to be very clear. Now, recreational private open space means that any part of that private open space of the allotment, or in simple terms, just to help, I guess, summarise that, it's the section or a part of a neighbour's lot that should have sunlight in it and that you cannot impede with your design. Okay, so examples of this occurring. Obviously, double stories is the first one that comes to mind. So if you are building a double story and this has not been discussed or factored in, you need to make sure it is. Okay, so there are drawings that can be done, which Darren will talk about shortly. But essentially, if you're building a double story, you want to see and make sure, depending on the orientation of that lot, what impact does it have on your neighbours? Does the shadow cast all the way across, halfway across their backyard? Because if it does, that's probably going to be a problem. All right. The other one that I guess is quite common is lots with lots of fall. So if you're sitting on the side of a hill there and you're a single story even, and it's up higher than the neighbours that are maybe lower than you, your house can also cast a fairly large shadow across their yard. So that's another area where you have to consider it. So if you're building double story, if you're building a single or double on a lot with a lot of fall, and the house is next door to you, is below you, that can happen. And then the third one, Darren, which is probably one that most people don't really understand, is small lot housing code. So we have discussed this before, but to summarize it, if you're building a house under 300 square meters, it's subject to a set of rules and conditions. One of those rules is to have a certain size area, which is 6 square meters of unshaded area. Quite often, though, with smaller housing code, it's usually your own house or your own fence that's casting the shadow that restricts that from happening. So my advice is, when you are building on a small lot under 300, make sure your consultant understands the regulations and that your house will comply with the unshaded requirements, which are quite easily to calculate. But the long story short is, if it's north or south facing, you will need a bigger backyard to achieve that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's it's certainly an issue that pops up regularly, Cole. And I guess one of the key parts of this is it usually only applies when the neighbour has certificate of occupancy. So if the house is already built and finished and the person's moved in, then you really got to look at, am I going to be shadowing their home, their private open space, with my home? And so if that's the case, then we really need to have a look at what does the design look like, how we're going to reduce that, and what are our options there. So how does the builder work it out? They do what they call a shadow diagram, and they draw the siding plan, so how your house looks like on your block, and they include the properties around it. Now, it should have the levels on that block as well, so that it actually determines the height of the home, because that also determines how much shadow is going to be cast. And they draw those at each of the following. So 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., and 3 p.m. And each of those will cast a different shadow. So they'll show their shadow moving around the block and around potentially the neighbour's block, to find out how much is getting, how much shadow is getting cast. And if on any of those neighbouring blocks, now you might have 3 neighbours, but you could equally have 6 neighbours. And so again, if you're cutting off sunlight for, going back to the regulation, you're not allowed to cut it off for 5 hours, right? So you've got to actually check how much that is impeding that area. And again, if they've got a massive backyard, you can shadow their backyard as long as you've got that 40 square metres that's not getting shadowed. So again, other things to consider is, if they've got sheds, etc., that are already shadowing their own backyard, that's their own fault, not your fault. So you don't have to be as stressed about that part of the area. But again, we're looking for this 40 square meters of area that's getting direct sunlight, and you've got to not block that out. So what do you do, I guess, if you are overshadowing? What are some of the solutions that you could do to try and make sure that you can still build a home on your block? So if possible, move the home away from the neighbours that you are shadowing. So if you've got room to, you might have your garage a couple of metres off the boundary, for example, on the north side, move the house that way and get it over on the boundary. That frees up more to the south side. That might be just enough to fix the problem. Again, if you've set your house further back on the block and you can move it forward slightly, move the house forward. That's certainly one. You may need to look at reducing the home to comply. So you might have been wanting a 50 square home, but you might only be able to fit a 40 square home. It might be that your ground floor gets bigger, but your upper floor gets smaller, because it's the upper floor that generally is causing the issue. You can apply for dispensation. And what that is that's going to the council and seeking approval to not comply, I guess. It does help if the neighbours agree to it. However, it's not guaranteed, if they do, that you'll actually get it approved. The other part is, if you are shadowing that area for 5 hours, you're probably not going to get it. So, if you're thinking, great, I'm shadowing for 5 hours, but I'll apply anyway. If you're shadowing for 3 hours, right? And you may be a chance you'll get it through. See, so it's a bit of, I guess, understanding what does that look like, and talk to the builder about how many times have you got this through in the past? Have you ever got one through? So no point paying money going through a delayed process to find out that the council say no anyway. And so, your builder should be able to give you some advice on that. Um, Again, if you're going for dispensation, it does cost money, a few $100s for the application, and it takes time. So it's generally 4 to 8 weeks to find out an answer that possibly is no still. So, it's just knowing what that process looks like. Have you got the time that you can spend doing that? Then my advice to you is think outside the box, right? So if you're working with your builder, think outside the box a little bit if you are not compliant. So things such as fence heights. So because your fence is allowed to shadow that area, and then your shadow can cast up against that same shadow and not be an issue, right? So fence heights is a great one where you can say, well, if I put fence extenders on my existing fence, then I can show a fence on my plans at 2 meters instead of 1.8. The maximum you can show is 2 meter high fences. So you can't put up a 6 meter high fence and think, now I comply. So they've worked out that you can't be so tricky, but 2 meter high fences may mean that you shadow less of their property, and therefore you might be able to get a bit of a win there. You can look at potentially lowering the site cut of the home, so dropping the house down a little bit. Again, we wouldn't encourage people to build their home into a hole, because then it ends up like a swimming pool and water gets under it. So again, talk with your builder, but if they can do a slightly deeper site cut, that might help. You can look at things like removing eaves is a great example. So the home design might have eaves upstairs. By removing those eaves, it casts a smaller shadow. So that could be one for you. You could look at lowering the ceiling heights if you've raised them. So you might have 2,700 ceilings upstairs, downstairs. You might have to go to stick the 2,700s downstairs and maybe go back to 2440s upstairs. I guess worst case scenarios, you may have to look at a different design. Possibly even move from a double to a single story in some cases. Some cases it's almost impossible to get anything to work. So I guess if you're caught up in overshadowing, you're going to usually have to make some level of compromise with your design. And that's not always great, because when you find out about this and you're caught up in it, sometimes it might be that the builder was half built when you signed up with your builder, and they've raced ahead and got their home finished really quickly. And now all of a sudden they've got a certificate of occupancy and you don't have a permit yet. And you need to now actually, comply. And so these things can sort of catch you unaware. But if that is the case, you're probably going to have to compromise, and that's not always great. So if you're having to compromise with your existing builder, you're going to have to compromise with any builder, because the regulation says that that's as big as the house can be without casting a shadow. So it's not like you can come and talk to me and I can say, oh, for sure, I'll make it work. No, the regulation's the same. So you're not going to get a different answer. The same footprint will have the same shadow result. So there's not like just great, I'll change builders. So, work with your builder to try and find a solution would be my answer to that.
And on that, Darren, the builders don't want this to happen.
Of course not.
But your sales consultant at the front end can't tell you that yet. Like, it's pretty difficult to work out if you're going to have overshadowing issues if you don't know what's being built next door yet or where that house is at. You can try and gather some of that information, but a lot of the time it's not really identified, Darren, until you're well into the process. As in, you've got plans drawn and a contract signed, perhaps, and it's not fun, it's not ideal, but just please understand, like to Darren's point, it's going to be the same no matter what builder you go to. So you best stick with the one that you chose for all the reasons you chose them in the first place, and you have to work together as best you can. Unfortunately, redesigning the house is actually really most of the time the only option, and that's the hardest one to take, because you spend so much time on getting that plan the way you wanted it, with those those inclusions and that contract, and now you're like, oh, I've got to take off a whole room or these sorts of things, and it can be hard, but just you have to accept this is a tough spot, and let's work together with the builder to work through the best possible solution that's available.
Yeah, indeed. I guess, on that note too, Cole, so, when you're in the planning stage, particularly if your land's titled, right, you should speak to your builder about this. And then what I mean by that is be open with your builder. My land's titled. I've owned it for a year and the neighbour's built already and they're on my south side. Probably a telltale sign straight away that, hey, we might have some issues here. And at least they can seek some advice around that for you, right? The other thing is check the land contract for things like building envelopes. That might mean you're making res code work, but the building envelope has a different set of regulations set to it around that. Restrictions that may also mean you have to build a double-story home, for example. And I just saw one recently that these houses are facing west. They're all double stories, but the one on the northernmost side hasn't been built yet. And I don't know how you can build a house on this block. Like it's almost impossible because it's shadowing the neighbour. The neighbour's built this big house, and all that's left is this little bit of backyard on the northern side that's all getting shadowed by the house. And I don't find a solution, yet you have to have a double story. And so, just make sure you understand all of this information that should be available to you. And it's not always available, but ask as many questions as you can to find out, is there any of these things going on there? Are there any building envelopes? The other part is...
And it highlights the importance of getting to site first.
It does, for sure. So I had something else in there. The other bit is sometimes there's restrictions to say, even though there's not a certificate of occupancy, you still have to comply with the same. So you have to assume you're going to overshadow the neighbour's property, right? Even though you don't know what they're actually building and where their unshaded private open space will be. So shadowing can be a issue regardless in certain circumstances. So again, read the land contract, ask more questions, talk to your conveyancer, talk to your builder, get as much advice as you can. If there are homes already built around your lot, it can become a big issue. So make sure you bring that to the builder's attention. Again, if you go in there and tell them nothing, and you're setting yourself for failure, and they're going to go and apply for a building permit and then find all this out and go, well, you never told me, right? And you do have a level of care yourself also to let them know what's going on around your block. So, make sure you're, talking with your builder really openly about that so that you don't end up in this bind where you're thinking, I'm going to build my dream house and it's now getting chopped in half upstairs, and that's often the reality. Our advice, as you just mentioned, Colin, is to start building on the lot as soon as possible after the titles are released. Don't wait for other homes to be built up around you first, because it can really restrict what you're doing. The other bit is, if you're looking to purchase a block and particularly build a double story, then and it's titled and it's been titled for some time, find out about overshadowing, what that's going to look like. Find out about overlooking as well. It's another issue, what that's going to look like. Talk to your builder about it so that you know what you're getting into before you go sign up for the block of land and then find out that you've got all these other headaches. There it is, mate.
Yeah, nice. Yep. Some of that's probably going to go above the head of some of the listeners, respectfully. It's just something that we deal with all the time and might be fresh news for you. So it's pretty overwhelming. But, yeah, just a good way to summarise that, Darren, I think, is just, if you're buying that block of land, you're building a double story, just ask the question. Overshadowing, what does it mean? Can you look into it for me before I buy this block of land? It is a bit sad that's what happens quite often. So, yeah. Excelente. That explains all that sort of stuff to a degree. Maybe overlooking might be another one we have to look at, Darren.
Yeah, for sure. Love to.
Separately. But, hopefully that helps, guys. It's just really just bringing awareness to the topic, I suppose. If you understood it, great. If you didn't, you've got some awareness about it, which is important. So, that's what we're here for. So if you like it and you're on a platform and you can leave us a 5-star review, that'll be super. We'd love that. Promotes the podcast even more, deeper into all the other home buyers who are out there looking for educational content like this that's objective without us trying to pitch and sell to you. And I guess if you've got any topic ideas, jump on the website, send us an email, and we will, get on there and start talking about those sorts of topics that we get sent as we do. And other than that, we look forward to seeing you guys on the next one. Thank you.
Right, guys. Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the podcast, guys. And just our disclaimer, whilst we're all about providing value to you, this podcast should not be considered as legal or financial advice. It contains general information only, and you should seek out independent professional advice on your personal situation before making any legal or financial decisions.
1, 2, 3.